Just to give a bit of a review of yesterday, certainly from my perspective, I think that yesterday's focus, as far as I read it, was very much looking at the practical nature of how we handle this problem and going from how we deal with it from policy right the way through to practical advice offered by many of the panelists, through to the sort of getting down into the technical weeds with industrial control systems and some of the building blocks that we rely on as a society and as states that present vulnerabilities. And that was a very interesting speech. And some of the things that came away to me is sort of the 3 C's of collaboration, cooperation, and communication. The fact that we will not be able to solve this standing alone. It's only by uniting, sharing information, sharing experiences, and learning from each other's experiences that we'll be able to do that. And that comes absolutely down to that collaboration. Collaboration amongst us, the likes of us in the audience, but also collaboration between customer and supplier, between state and private sector. Because, as I said, in the stateless world of cyberspace, it's impossible for us to sit within our own islands. We have to join up. But I really look forward to today because there are some very, very interesting topics on the agenda. This starts to potentially move into the more contentious areas. Hopefully we'll get some fairly diverging views from those on the panels today. Talking about, well, starting off, talking about cyber offense. Now, there are many who say in the conventional, the physical world, that offense is the best form of defense. But of course, cyberspace brings that equation with an awful lot of complexities. It's not as simple as it might appear, and it's certainly not as simple as it is in the physical world. Issues around ethics, also issues around the sort of the unintended consequences of our actions. If you fire an explosive missile and it explodes at the other end, proliferation is far easier to control. I'm not going to steal Jonathan Shaw's and others' thunder any more than that. It's just to whet the appetite. Certainly that looks interesting. And also looking at some of the other things that come along. Protecting CNI against cyber terrorism. Is cyber terrorism a threat? It's one that is much debated. Also looking again at how we handle boundaries in stateless cyberspace and how that plays into cyber warfare. What the place is for hackers. Should hackers be recognized as a potential force for good? Or do we need to have a very clear black and white attitude? You're either for the good side or you're for the bad side. And these are interesting topics and interesting in terms of the ethics around them and how those ethics play into the policies, and very much topics that primarily need to be led by the state. It's not something that industry can lead on in these topics. Industry needs to receive that lead from states, and the policy needs to set, and not just set within the context of one state, but actually within the community of allies. It's not really something that I could in any way comment when faced with the wealth of experience that comes from the panelists. And therefore, rather than speaking any longer myself, my intention is to sort of hand over to those panelists because they bring a depth of experience and a depth of knowledge that I couldn't even come close to. So to kick the day off, we're starting off with the issue around cyber offense. And Marc Gartenberg is leading the panel on this. A man, actually, when we're talking about policy and the challenges of drafting and defining policy and trying to predict the unintended consequences that might come out of it, he has probably more experience than many in this room, having had the experience of multiple administrations in the States handling these sorts of issues. The Clinton administration, the Bush administration, most recently the Obama administration dealing with NSA and also academia. So, Marc, without further ado, if I could ask you to introduce your panel and kick the proceedings off for the day. And to set a good example, I've tried to stay within my time slot. Let's hope we keep to a nice tight agenda today.
That's great. It's on? Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. It's to quote Grace Slick on the second day of Woodstock, welcome to Morning Madness. Today is going to be interesting because today is going to be a little bit of a difference, I hope, in the sense that we're going to be making this more of a collectivist discussion rather than us espousing our own independent opinions and opine and views and so forth. We'd like to, at least in my opinion, I'm a moderator, and I'd like to truly live up to that and moderate a discussion. We say we use 1/3 of our brain power. So if every table uses 1/3, I think together we can all have a very lively discussion. And I'd like to encourage the audience, especially in particular, to use the wisdom of the folks who are going to be on the panel today. So with that in mind, let me introduce the folks who will be joining us. Professor Piper, who we all have come to know and love. Would you please step up? And Jonathan Shaw, former Major General with the Ministry of Defense in the UK, please. And of course, Marc Obiso from ITU, coordinator. Welcome aboard, please. Cyber offense and defense, are they really mutually exclusive? They're certainly national priorities. Once upon a time, there was a woman by the name of Admiral Grace Hopper. And Admiral Hopper was one of the I think the first woman admiral in the United States Navy. Admiral Hopper made a very interesting statement once and said that the safest place for a battleship is at port, but a battleship was not meant to stay at port. That's kind of the approach we need to look at. And I have a blog, if you don't know me, which is kind of a good thing. You can find me. I'm out in cyberspace, a small footprint. But needless to say, I'd like to talk about just a couple of things before we get started. So the first was that in terms of the notion of what it is involving risk, trust. I'd like to talk a little bit about architecture. I need to talk about rethinking. We need to constantly rethink. We need to constantly reshape. We need to constantly be one step ahead, and we constantly have to, as cybersecurity professionals, use our minds and think ahead. Think strategically and collectively. Because the greatest power that we have, and I've been around the world, and there are very few countries that I haven't worked inside of with governments. There are very few agencies in the United States. If you pick 3 letters, I can probably tell you that I've been involved with all of them, in military intelligence and defense. Diplomacy, okay, that too. And from that standpoint, we come to learn a few things. First of all, WWW stands, in my opinion, for Wild, Wild West. And we need to look at things from a cyber strategic standpoint and think about things that way, because we need to think about re-architecting. We need to think about how we can shift, how we can shape, how we can constantly change the dynamics, because the playing field is constantly changing. The moment we come up with a new strategy to mitigate, whoever it is, if you want to call them opponents, contenders, defenders, offenders, are coming up with new strategies to circumvent that mitigation. So those are the challenges we face. So in this morning's session, we'll be talking about that back and forth. There's a balance there. There's a balance in everything. There's the yin and the yang, the offense, the defense. What makes up offense? Who's the offenders? Who are the defenders? I have a blog. It's called Words Matter. I was talking about that before earlier, and actually words do matter. So with that in mind, I just want to give you a little bit from folks who may have heard of Bruce Schneier. I happened to be reading his book the other day when I was on the plane, and I just want to read quickly, briefly, as fast as I can to you. And again, I'm just going to throw out some concepts and some notions and some ideas and thoughts, and I'd like to encourage discussion, and our panelists will have an opportunity to speak. He said, just today, a stranger came to my door claiming he was here to unclog a bathroom drain. I let him into my house without verifying his identity, and not only did he repair the drain, he also took off his shoes so he wouldn't track mud on the floor. When he was done, I gave him a piece of paper that asked my bank to give him some money. He accepted it without a second glance. At no point did he attempt to take my possessions. At no point did I attempt to do the same of him. In fact, neither of us worried that the other would. My wife was also home, but it never occurred to me that he was a sexual rival and I should therefore kill him. Also today, I passed several strangers on the street without any of them attacking me. And it goes on, but the basic notion is there. You understand the notion, you understand the idea. So what is a threat? What is a risk? When do you offend? When do you defend? So with that in mind, I'd like to move ahead and leave Jonathan, did you have some words you'd like to present? Okay.
Can I have my slide,
Order,
please? Still waiting for my slide. There it is. Yep. That's it. There's the slide. Okay, so I've been asked to talk about creating a national capability in cyberspace. My credentials for doing this are that I was the first head of the MOD's Defence Cybersecurity program in the United Kingdom. And as such, my task was to be concerned with cohering cyber capability across the MOD, across government, nationally, and also internationally. And what I just must say at the outset is I am not a technologist. I'm a paratrooper. I'm a user of technology, but I am not myself a technologist. And that's a good thing, because actually this topic is not about technology. It is about how to use technology. And it's about matters much more than just technology. So, first bullet there, cyberspace, the fourth medium for operations. Cyberspace joins land, sea, and air, and some would say space, but I tend not to. So it joins land, sea, and air as a medium through which people can achieve their operational effect. And just as in land, sea, and air, cyberspace is connected with all those other operating mediums. It is not a discrete medium. This seemed to take people by surprise when the United States government said that if they were attacked via cyberspace, they would retaliate in any means possible. The reaction from the world cyber community was that this was somehow unfair, and that if you were attacked in cyberspace, your only possible response was in cyberspace. Well, ladies and gentlemen, dropping a big bomb on a server is actually a perfectly valid means of achieving your cyber effect if it shuts down someone else's cyberspace. So we need to think of cyberspace as just part of the operating area in which governments do their business. And if you want more evidence of that, look at the Arab Spring, what happened in Libya, when the Libyan government saw that the internet was being used for creating and generating unrest in the country, and they shut down their internal internet server, and the coalition against it desperately tried to implant servers to restore the internet. So, cyberspace, we may think of it as a virtual world, but it does have a real part to it. It has real physical attributes to it. It is part of the real world. So we must learn to think of cyberspace as being connected and part of the real world. Next bullet, cyberspace is insecure, and therefore we must embrace risk management. We cannot try risk avoidance, which is our natural controlling instinct. Like land, air, and sea, cyberspace is insecure. As was said yesterday, the internet was designed for speed and access. It was not designed for security. If I can suggest a Manhattan project for anyone with enough money and time, it would be to recreate an internet, a cyberspace, this time based on security. So in this insecure cyberspace, straight control measures, simple control measures, will not work.
A top-down command and control structure that tries to pre-plan everything in advance simply won't work. It will not be flexible enough, it will not be fast enough to meet the challenge. Therefore, if we're going to create a national cyber capability, we have to embrace command. We have to empower local responses. And we have to encourage a sort of bottom-up, speedy response, because it's only by encouraging local initiatives to respond to local problems that we will get the kind of response that we need, given the speed with which the cyber challenge is evolving. That's easy to say, it's very hard to do. We haven't got there yet in UK. I don't know any country that has, but conceptually that has to be the goal we have to aim at. And in responding to the threat and the potential of activity in cyberspace, I've listed 4 responses: structural, technical, behavioral, and then finally the political response. Let's start by talking about the structural response. I've written there, one system, no stovepipes. I don't mean one technical IT network. I mean one command structure. I mean that everybody in the, if you're trying to create a national capability, then everyone in the nation must be talking to each other and sharing their information. What we can't afford to have is separate groups knowing certain things and not passing the information on, or competing stovepipes within government. Hackers will find the weakest link within a connected network, and our governments need to be connected to work properly. Therefore, there must be someone in charge of it, establishing standards. And as was said yesterday, it must be clear who is in charge and who has a power of decision over the nation's cyberspace. Now, that's easier said than done. I don't want to steal all the thunder from the final bullet about political culture, but actually how every country responds to the cyberspace threat depends upon their political culture. In the United Kingdom, we have a sharing culture. We share between departments, and our departments are mutually dependent, and we all depend upon GCHQ. The United States, our closest ally, does not have a culture of sharing. It has a culture of self-contained stovepipes. It's obsessed with the authorities of individual components of government. As you may know, there was much publicity about a pact between the MOD in the UK and Australia and the Department of Defense in America. This works excellently between Britain and Australia. It also works well with America, except the biggest problem is internal to the United States, creating coherence. So you and your countries will have to decide how coherent and cohesive and how cooperative your structures are. But I encourage you to be as unified as possible. Next one, technical. The title of this talk said that defense and offense are mutually exclusive. This is completely wrong. Defense and offense must be mutually dependent. That's again is easier said than done. The first thing that we found when we looked at the UK system, when we were trying to combine offense and defense, was that our MOD defensive systems were completely disconnected from GCHQ. There was no sharing of information or linkage, so we solved that one. Well, why is it important that they be linked? Because if you're going to maneuver in cyberspace, you need to balance offense and defense and change the information and swap it around in a rapid, fast way. What should be the response? The first thing we need to do on the technical side is prioritize what assets need resourcing. It's very interesting the United States Department of Defense has already decided that its restricted network is open. They're not going to bother protecting it. It's an insecure medium, and everyone who uses it knows it. Perfectly valid decision. However, if you want to defend something, you need to maneuver in cyberspace. You need good intelligence about what's coming. You need a good defense, defensive walls you can put in as good as you can get. But then you need an offensive capability in 2 areas. One, internal, to attack intruders, to repair, to reconfigure, to survive. More contentiously, you perhaps need an external offensive capability to attack your attackers. That is the essence of maneuver, as every operational person in this room will know. The biggest problem about responding to an attacker by attacking them is attribution. We discussed it yesterday. How do you know who you are being attacked by? The other aspect of attacking people is when you're actually on the offensive. You decide who your enemy is and you want to attack them. I'll just list the 4 problems without going into them. Really, it all stems from the imprecision of the attack. How do you know precisely what your weapon is going to do? Therefore, how can you judge the proportionality of what you are doing? Therefore, how can you judge the legality of what you're going to do? And a final interesting restraint is, do you want to attack someone's vulnerabilities when you yourself may be vulnerable? Next one, behavioral. People are the front line. They must be trained and led. There are no technical or control solutions. People are the vulnerability. Now, this conference is full of CIOs and CISOs. What we actually need is presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, and chairmen, because it's they that provide leadership in an organization. We need to train people in cyber hygiene and then lead them to use it. And finally, political. It depends on the culture. The challenge every country faces is to assert the balance between economic and social liberty on one hand and security on the other. And that will determine how much they choose to regulate the private sector and civil society. And every country will come up with their own answer on that one. And the second aspect of this is the political will to maneuver in cyberspace. Let us suppose you have created an offensive cyber capability. Let me be quite clear. If you want to attack another country, it's not as easy as just flicking a switch. You need to do some pretty invasive reconnaissance of that country to find its vulnerabilities, to implant whatever you want to do into their system so that you can then flick the switch. In other words, if you want to pre-plan an operation, you have to be fairly aggressive and probably break political rules to do it in advance if you're going to carry out the reconnaissance to prepare the attacks. This is a very politically contentious subject, therefore. I've already mentioned the mutual vulnerability question, which is a major deterrent on cyber offensive operations. And the final restraint, it seems to me, on the moment, is at the moment, this is pretty much uncharted political waters. There are no clear rules, and it's very unpredictable what the consequences would be. And I think there's a sense of mutual fear between nations, which is stopping them engaging in this kind of offensive activity at whole scale. The final point I just want to leave you about all this list is that creating a national capability in cyberspace is more than just technology. It is actually about living in the digital age. And just as everyone enjoys the benefits of living in the digital age, so everybody in our populations must accept the responsibility that comes with living in the digital age. And only by doing that will we be able to create a truly national cyberspace capability. Thank you.
Thank you, John. A couple of points. There's the need to share, the need to be aware, and the need to care. And I think the fact that we're all here indicates one thing. We care. Let's share. So I encourage audience participation. I encourage dialogue as much as possible. I encourage questions. I encourage thinking. I would be eternally grateful if we could turn those lights around a little bit and put it on the audience, actually, in fact, and use the think power that we have together in the room and quiz us on anything that you think you need to. The last point I just mentioned earlier was the need to care. I have worked directly with secretaries of the various agencies of defense, and when we began to introduce the notion in the United States of the need to share, that was new in the Defense Department. And I had no problem talking directly to the secretary and explaining to him that this is why we need to do it. I had no problem talking directly to Madeleine Albright and telling her exactly what we need to do. I had no problems with that. Those are facts, those are the truth, but it comes from a genuine need to care. and a need to willingness to share and take a little bit of risk. That's all. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce our next presenter, out of order, of course, because if we were in order, it would just be static. So, Marc Obiso, please, from ITU, who graciously sponsored it, helped bring this all together.
Okay, thanks, Marc. So I don't have a presentation. I had just a few comments, and I'll try to be short because I think this is a very, very interesting issue, and I think that we should be as much as possible interactive. There were a few points, actually very important points highlighted by John, and I want to just express a word of caution here, because we are talking about something that can generate situations where there would be escalations that could be uncontrolled, okay? I tried to give some elements here, and there was the very last point of Jonathan that I think is the wrap-up of everything. We are trying to deal with an environment, with a possible situation that is completely unstructured. It's completely undefined without any rule, okay? Apart from some specific case in which countries have started to address this in terms of how a possible military reaction can be undertaken if in case of a specific massive cyber attack into a country. But if we start to go a little bit deeper in understanding what it is, we are immediately find situation where we don't know exactly what we are talking about. I mean, even the country itself. We talk about attribution, okay? This is, it's a word that can be simply identify, okay, I know who is attacking. But it's more complicated than this, because it's not only identifying the geographical source, but identify who. In the real space, let's say in the military situation, I would say that more or less, if maybe some person specific case, you can understand who is attacking, or you can understand who is the enemy. In the cyberspace, this is completely undefinable in certain cases. I'll give you an example. I mean, everyone is talking about Stuxnet, or Flame, or Gauss. If you really see the literature and you see, let's say, really, I mean, the understanding, very few experts can tell you exactly who was the originator. There are, you know, understanding, okay, it's a state-sponsored attack, fine. Someone is saying it's the US, someone is saying it's US together with Israel, someone is saying it's China, there was, you know, kind of a masking in order to create a situation. I mean, you don't know. That's the reality, okay? There could be a collaboration between countries, there could be one country, there could be two countries, but according to my knowledge, and I would like really to challenge some of you that exactly can say who was the originator and give me the evidence, you don't know. So just this simple element could, you know, bring to a situation where we assume something, and then, you know, a country starting to undertake a a military response, we could be completely wrong. So I don't want to say that we don't have to do anything, but what I'm trying to highlight in here is that we are kind of moving in a situation where we are trying to address issues where the fundamental element of understanding is not existing. And I come back again with the intervention of yesterday, where we are hearing and seeing the disparity of development between countries, where, just through another example, a country could, or, you know, a group of people that wants to harm another country can actually deploy capabilities in a country that has no legal framework, that has no structured approach or structured concrete understanding of what cyber retaliation means, okay? And it can generate an attack from there. Then the country that is attacked, how is going to react? Is going to basically start dealing with the geographical space, start dealing with the, let's say, with the technical attribution, if you want. So you start going to the IP addresses and understanding who is originating, and understanding the DNS zone that has been, let's say, delimited as a source of attack. So again, you know, this because there is no really a junction that has been initiated as for the real space on cyberspace. So this kind of a direct transposition, as US was saying, okay, we retaliate with any means possible. This is actually, you know, a little bit unfeasible, if you think. And this is why the cyber community started to react in this way, because you cannot transpose 100% what is in real world in the cyber world. In some cases, mainly in the kind of something that we call a civil cyber attacks, yes, you can do. Cybercrime you can do, because there are some specific offenses that can be easily transposed. And in fact, most of the countries are actually transposing step by step, let's say, the legal system in the, with the criminalization of offenses in the real world, in the cyber world. So that will work. But when we talk about, you know, state sponsor, state behavior, this is a little more difficult. Then there is all the discussion about no state sponsor attack, if you want, or no state behavior, which is a completely another, you know, let's say, doctrine that has not been developed yet. And this includes, you know, all these groups that actually are kind of manifesting themselves through cyber action that, again, for which there is no attribution. There is no understanding where they belong to. Some political organizations or criminal organizations associated to some state. So there is a long discussion within the UN, specifically within the governmental group of experts, the GG, where, you know, they are trying to address this. And as a matter of fact, I was discussing with one member of the GG, which is here with us, which is Egypt. And Dr. Sharif was telling me that the progress is very slow. Because again, there is no clear understanding on the basis of some of the elements. So I wanted just to, you know, put on the table some of these elements, because we need to be very, very, very careful before starting assuming or, you know, going in a direction. Okay, now I come back to my country and I start, putting in place cyber capabilities. Yes, you can do it. Okay, but with the understanding that, again, and maybe this is something that can be addressed during the day. I think the main element is really to try to start working together and collaborating. Trying to start to remove political differences, because if we start building another Cold War, which is in cyber, then, you know, the consequence can be very, very, very dramatic, okay? And I'll stop here, so maybe we can, we save some space. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate that. Thank you very much, Marco. And our last speaker is Professor Fred Piper. Please.
Yes, hello. This could be a very interesting day. I'm just very sorry I've got to leave after this talk. First of all, let me just address the two issues that I was supposed to address. One of them was the CERT as a line of defense. Now, when I came here, I thought this was nonsense, because I thought the R in CERT stood for response, and a response is not hardly really a line of defense. I've now been educated, and most of you mean by the R, you mean readiness, and so I changed my mind. Happy to change my mind, happy to be educated. In the second thing we're going to do is specialist national research institutes. Yes, they exist, yes, they're very useful, and in response to one of the questions in one of yesterday's session, the UK is one of its two specialist cyber research institutes is devoted to what's loosely called the human factors. So it's the combination of psychology, certainly not technical, why people do things, how they do it, and how you respond. Now I'd like to get back to responding to the first two speakers, and half agreeing and half very seriously disagreeing with some of the comments being made. From yesterday, the general themes were capacity building, preparedness, collaboration, communications, the global aspect, and so on. And I'm here, and one of the reasons we're here is to celebrate Oman being the regional center. Yeah, I'm in a region where it's not very big, and I happen to know personally, because I helped set it up, that there is an MSc in information security at Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi, and yet I find that half the audience have never heard of it. And this is not exactly collaboration in the region, this is something that's a bit strange. The educational process, and remember I am an educationalist, is unfortunately not equipped to deal with the rapid change of the environment that we're working in, the cyberspace, whatever you want to call it. I'll give you a very good example. Anybody who got a degree in computer science 30 years ago and then left the planet and came back, their degree now is absolutely useless. Degrees are for life, the environment changes, and there is no point in relying on out-of-date qualifications to claim expertise in a given area. So we have to have, and universities have to introduce, a dynamic syllabus. The system changes so fast, the need for reactions is so fast, that it just cannot cope, and out-of-date qualifications just don't help. Similarly, there was a discussion yesterday about vendors and are we at their mercy or are they at our mercy? Well, if you buy equipment from a vendor, you don't want to change it every year because you probably can't afford it, but equally, it's likely to be out of date after a year. And therefore, the same type of issue arises that because it's such a fast-changing environment, the commitment has to be such that you've got to be able to adapt, and you can't adapt because the cost is there. I know I was talking to Marc about this yesterday, and he said, oh, yes, you can, and that's great. That'll be one point of discussion. The offense-defense scenario is fascinating. You heard a very military view of life, and offense there meant nothing more than bomb the installation. Offense has many different meanings in this world, and there are offenses that could be cyber offenses. Also, the impact notion is almost of the concept of offense by being able to track down who committed the offense and then punish them, convict them, introduce some laws or some conventions, not bomb the hell out of them, just punish the individuals or the system that's concerned. It may or may not work, but that is the goal that's going there. It's not, in my personal view, it's not the fact that it's unfair to retaliate to a cyber attack by a physical means. There's no question that cyber world and the physical world are united. It's just frightening. It is absolutely scary that, and furthermore, not just scary, but it's only large nations that can threaten other nations with that type of physical attack. Britain can latch onto America and therefore be protected from whatever it wants to be protected from. But on the whole, I find it frightening rather than unfair. I don't think unfair enters the thing at all. Now, I had thought that I had to talk first. Most of the other points I wanted to make are already been made, so I'm happy now to just shut up, join the panel, and see what happens. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got some diverse thinking. This is excellent, I think. Critical word. So what I'd like to do at this time is kind of open the floor for questions, and I have some that come to mind, and maybe I'll start. Yes, this gentleman. Microphone here. And I'd like to kind of just iterate on a point that Fred just made, which is really, it comes down to thinking. It comes down to individual thought. It comes down to an understanding, a basic understanding, what's right, what's wrong. These notions, these concepts, the dynamics have all changed. The date changes from one to the next. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? What color hat are you wearing? Does it matter? What's black? What's white? What's gray? What's blue? Does that matter? We need to have models, but at the same time, we have a model is only as good as it was. It has to change. It has to be dynamic. And in order to protect our systems, we have to have dynamic thinking, and we have to have dynamic action, because and some of these actions have to be bold, and we have to take chances. We have to take risks. It's inevitable. So between the idea of thought and flexibility and risk and balancing all of these factors together, we have to recognize that if it's not us, who will it be?
Can we ask the question?
Yes, please. I'm sorry. Before.
It's because I think the time. So I think the other gentleman want to ask first.
Abdullah Al-Muqbil from Ministry of Defense, Saudi Arabia. I would like to ask about, is there a global legal authority for the cyber war as the traditional war around the world?
Yeah. Could you please repeat the question?
Is there a global legal authority as United Nations for the traditional war, for the cyber war?
Can I take that?
Please.
I think the simple answer is no, but I don't think we should confuse ourselves. Many people in responding to the cyber threats think we need a whole new set of cyber rules, as if cyberspace is a completely new environment. Actually, criminality is to do with the effect achieved, not the means by which you achieve it. If you rob a bank with a pistol, it is the same crime as if you rob a bank via cyberspace. The crime is the theft, it is not the means of doing it. So the first recourse, if you're talking about cyber war and operations in cyberspace, your first test of legality is existing law. Are you creating fraud? Are you deceiving someone? Are you stealing? Are you destroying? That's the crime. The fact that you do it by cyberspace is sort of legally irrelevant. It's relevant in it being much harder to prove. That's a separate issue. But in terms of the law you're breaking, our start point for actions in cyberspace is whether it breaches existing laws, which, as I say, focus on the effect. But is there an overarching structure of what's allowed and permissible? Well, as I think we're going to discuss after the coffee break, that's really all about international norms of behavior. It's accepted patterns of behavior. It's a bit like the world of espionage. You know, how much illegal activity are people prepared to tolerate? This isn't written down in law. It's just a question of international norms of behavior. That's really what we're talking about. But let's defer that discussion perhaps till after the coffee break, when I'm moderating a session when we're looking at exactly that issue.
Can I ask my...
Just one point I'd like to add to that is one of the things that we worked with Donald Rumsfeld at the time, the Defense Department, and we were working on kind of getting to an understanding of the difference between outputs and outcomes. And in terms of that, the output is a significant difference between an output and an outcome, especially when it comes down to legalities.
Sorry, just I want you to complement a little bit what you were saying. No, it is true, it doesn't exist. Although, just to comment on Jonathan, it is true that some of the offenses in the real world can be transposed to the cyber world. Although the prosecution process, in some cases doesn't exist. So you were saying, okay, you rob a bank with a pistol, you have a mean to prosecute the criminal, you have a mean to actually bringing evidence to the court. In some cases for the cyber, you don't have this simply because some of the legal frameworks in countries don't support that. So it means you don't have laws, in other words, in countries that would allow a person or someone that bring a digital evidence to a court in order to prosecute. So that is the problem that we need to face when we also talk about something that can be escalated in the cyber defense. Because if you don't have this basic principle in the countries as a part of the legal system, as a part of the legal culture, then all the process that would basically generate that as a consequence, I don't want to say fail, but would be jeopardized, would be in danger. So this, again, comes back to what Fred was saying in terms of, we don't need to see the offense just, reacting to, let's say, an act to physical means. Offense can be also seen as, start moving in a cooperative manner to start equipping all ourselves. So all the 190 or 200 nations of the UN or whatever, you know, to start building these basic capabilities that I can tell you in some countries do not exist, or in some countries are not yet developed. So that's an important point to be taken into consideration, because if we carry on thinking, okay, countries that have, then they are okay, it's wrong. It is not like that, because we talk about cyberspace, but we also talk about countries that they don't have this such of experience or such of knowledge or such of a capability in place. That's one of the main points here to be discussed.
Ruslan.
Okay, I think I wanted to ask a question, but it seems now we're going to be changed. Actually, just so I have a comment. When we talk about the notion of offensive and defensive, I think I agree with Marco and Dr. Fred, is that if the audience are actually military people or Minister of Interior, could be that kind of thing. But for us here at the moment, we need to defend. That's, I think, what we're trying at the moment to defend, because we're not there. We even don't have the proper defense at the moment. So we have to first establish a defense before anything else, before putting rules and regulations. We have to defend, because we are at very high risk. That's item one. Item two is that to trust, you don't trust people around you. You need to earn the trust, and that's not an easy thing. You can see that between nations, they cannot trust each other. And third thing is that when you talk about offense, I look at it exactly, the offense is not to cyber offense someone, to attack someone, because as Marcus said, and there is no one you know, and they are as anonymous, so you don't know who are they, and they believe that they're right. So I think the important here is to have a law which comes from an entity which is bigger than anyone else, that put that law, say, if you do something like that, you will be followed, prosecuted, get it to the point, and be having things. Because if there is no punishment, people will be free to do it all the time. And I think, as what we talk about hacktivism, they feel it's the right to do that. So you don't have a law. So I think if we look at it today, as we are here, I'm sure we want to learn how to defend ourselves, but to offense and to put the laws, I think if we look at it, we're just a small thing. We need to look at the bigger thing, to have a proper law around the whole country, globally, in order to get someone, like what Marcus said, if I don't know who he is, maybe he is somewhere in Congo. How you can catch that guy? There is no law there. So the point is, let's look at defense first, let's protect, make sure we have doors and windows and locks, and then we look at how we can shoot people behind the window. That's how it is. Thank you very much.
I have a question, I guess. All right. You did have a question. We're still here? Okay, great. Difference between law and policy?
Sorry?
The difference between law and policy.
Policy or policy?
Yes.
Policy.
Yes.
Policy.
The difference between law and policy. In my opinion, the law is black or it's white.
I mean, you're asking us or you're asking...
Just in general discussion. Law is either black or white. You either break the law or you're in compliance with the law. What's the difference between a law as opposed to a policy? If we look and talk in terms of cyber policies, as opposed to cyber law. Opening up the floor.
Policies are aspirations.
That's
what you're trying to achieve. Law is a black and white rule that you break or you don't.
So in other words, the policy would establish, let's say, the overall approach that the country would say on a specific thing, while the law is the implementation of the policy through a rule that could then generate some reactions or some consequences if it's broken. So if it's broken. So when we talk regulatory policy or ICT policy, generally speaking, we talk about the aspiration or the overall objective that a country will have. I mean, through a certain number of implementation mechanisms. One of these is the legal system. Another one is the regulatory system. Another one is to maybe, establish some specific authorities or establish some specific, additional mechanism, okay, through organizational structures. But, if we map this to the discussion here, you see that the process was very clear in countries that went through all the path. So they started to establish a policy. Well, before they started to establish a strategy. Then you establish a policy, then you establish a legal system, and then you start establishing the capabilities that would manifest it through, the establishment of specific authorities, in the Homeland Security in the US, for example, or, some specific elements that would be able to implement the policy. What the gentleman from Bahrain was saying, and I very, very much agree with this, is that We cannot take whatever is before, and then we start discussing about cyber offense if we don't have all these elements in place, okay? We can do that in terms of a discussion, in terms of, exchanges, in terms of learning process, But then when you start really doing things in the country, you need to have all these other elements in place. So some countries are making the mistake that, they start addressing this and they're starting to go to the table of international negotiation without having established all the principles before. And here, there is this other element in terms of international norms of behavior that Jonathan was saying. This could help at the international level to speed up the process and to have a common understanding that can be mapped at the national level, okay? But if you don't have this top-down approach, and that at the same time, this bottom-up approach, the things will not work.
Mm-hmm. Marc, I think, sadly, we're probably going to need to draw a line on this conversation now. And I say sadly because actually I think we could probably fill an entire day just with this topic alone if we had the time. But I'd like to thank our panelists here for some very stimulating, and also the audience.